It's time to change your world. It's time to let it go. The things you used to think, the things you used to know, they don't help you anymore. It's time to change your mind. If it's peace you want to find.
This is Kurt Kaikonen, pastor of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, at your neighborhood church. Today on Change Your World, we'll be in the book of 1st and 2nd Samuel. So grab your Bible and let's get started.
It's time to change your world. You need to let it go.
Where it tells us everybody does what's right in their own eyes, where this nation has fallen into idolatry over and over and over again for the whole 400-year period. And here, they're still blaming God for their defeat. They don't even consider that it could be something they've done. And they don't seek God here, and they're not trying to find out why they've been defeated, where it's almost obvious that it's all been caused by Israel's disobedience to God's laws. And so these elders, what they should have been doing, they should have been reviewing their covenant with God and to see where they had failed. But they don't do that. So instead of re-examination or self-examination and repentance, they take things into their own hands and they don't even seek God in this matter. So instead of being led by God, they're trying to lead God. And so now they send to Shiloh to get the Ark of the Covenant, as if the Ark itself was God, as if they can make God deliver them from their enemies. And if you remember, it was always the Lord who had directed the movements of the ark in the wilderness. And when they came into the land, it was always moved with special handling. So what it looks like they're trying to do here is that they're trying to play Moses and Joshua, that they're trying to reenact the scenes from the battles with Moses and the Midianites or with Joshua and Jericho. And I don't know who came up with the bright idea of going and getting the ark and carrying it around like it's a toy, but those priests, Hophni and Phinehas, were definitely no Moses or Joshua because they're like the most wicked men. They hate God, they don't know him, and they don't believe in him. So they got the wrong guys to carry the ark, and these guys, they're not even supposed to be touching the ark because it's only the high priest who's allowed to go into the presence of the ark, and then he's only allowed to go into the presence of the ark once a year, and that's to sprinkle blood for the atonement for the sins of Israel. He's not even supposed to touch it. And so you wonder here, well, why didn't Eli stop them? He's the high priest. Couldn't he have stopped them? But the truth is Eli, he's never been able to stop his sons from doing anything that they've ever wanted to do. None of the wrongs they've ever committed up to this point. So why would he stop them now? Which tells us again that Eli, he didn't repent. And these sons, what would ever give them any reason to listen to their father now? They've never listened to their father. But Eli here, he is the high priest and he is in charge of the ark. So Eli here, he is responsible. And if that ark was to be moved, it was only to be moved by the Kohathites. They were the only ones who were allowed to move the ark. And it was only to be moved at the direction of the high priest. And so you can't call what Israel's doing here as if this is an act of faith. And that's because God did not initiate this. And biblical faith is always acting on what God has said, not on whatever you've made up in your own mind. And so this is where all the prosperity teachers in the church, where they get it all wrong. All the name it and claim it's and the blab it and grab it's, where they think they can name something and claim something, and that God's going to have to do it, which is their definition of faith. But faith, biblical faith, is always acting on what God has said. Because God, he's not our puppet where we can make him dance to our will. And so here, Israel, they're treating the Ark of the Covenant as if it was just an idol. And then if you look at verse 3, and if you look at what they're saying, let us bring the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord from Shiloh to us. And when it comes among us, it may save us from the hands of our enemies. But when did the Ark of the Covenant ever become an it? It's not a person. It's just a wooden box covered with gold. And it's a place where God said, a place where he would meet them there. But now Israel, it's going to be their good luck charm, as if it is God himself, and that the ark, that it saves them, and it's not God. So they're kind of thinking of this as being like God in a box. And so I can kind of imagine Israel in their camp, and they're all walking around in circles, and they're probably having their Jericho marches, and them all hooping and hollering and shouting as if the walls are going to fall down, reenacting all these victories. And they're all running around and they're getting themselves all worked up and all excited. And that should tell us right here that there can be a lot of hooping and hollering in a church, but that's not a sign that God is there at all. And that's not a sign that God is in anything that they're doing. It's just a lot of noise. It's just a lot of emotionalism. And it doesn't ever make it real. And so here in verse 5, it says, Israel shouted so loud that the ground shook and the Philistines heard it. And then the Philistines, they find out that the Ark of the Covenant was in Israel's camp. And they've never heard of the Ark going before Israel into battle. And they actually think the Ark is the God of Israel. And they give credit to the ark for destroying and overcoming Egypt. And you have to realize Egypt is a whole different class of world power. And they know that they're nothing compared to being like Egypt, because compared to Egypt, they're just a bunch of small tribes. And the Philistines being idolaters, thinking that the ark is Israel's God. It shows you they're very confused about Israel's God. And then they actually call it Israel's gods. They use the plural form. But they're wrong. And they're wrong in the fact that the ark had any part to play in Israel's deliverance or overcoming Egypt. Because the Ark of the Covenant, it wasn't even built until 2 years after Israel had departed from Egypt. So now you have Israel here, and because of their superstitions, they think this battle is going to be easy and that they're going to win this battle. And you got the Philistines here, and they're confused, and they're afraid that they're going to lose. And Israel, they're trying to create this fear in the Philistines of like how God had created a fear among the Canaanite nations and how it made their hearts melt. And if Israel somehow thought that this was some kind of psychological effect on the Philistines to make their heart melt and run away, it actually had the reverse effect. Because instead of making their hearts melt so they ran away in fear, the Philistines, they fought harder with the courage of desperate men because they're not wanting to be enslaved by Israel. So now, instead of Israel just losing 4,000 men in the first battle, now they lose 30,000 men in this battle, which is 7 times more than they had already lost. And in the 1970s, there was an excavation in Izubet Sarte, and they've found this Philistine inscription written on the side of a grain silo, which gave an account of this battle. And it even mentions the name of the priest Hophni. And this is the oldest known relic that has ever been found with an extra biblical reference to any Old Testament event. And so now in this battle, we have the ark captured. And then you have the 2 priests, Hophni and Phinehas. They're killed, just like the prophet had told their father Eli that they would die the same day. And though the ark was captured, God wasn't captured. Nothing had been lost from God's view. Though Israel, they acted like God himself was captured. And I don't know if you can imagine what it's like to see 30,000 dead bodies laying in a field, but that's what they had left in Ebenezer. And so now you go back to Shiloh and you have this 98-year-old man, blind, and he's waiting outside the tabernacle and he's leaning back on his chair where he always sat, where now Eli, the high priest, his heart, it's been troubled ever since his sons went into the Holy of Holies and taken the ark, which tells you that Eli, he knew better than to let them take the ark. But that's what he always did. He always honored his sons higher than he did God. So why would it be any different now? And now Eli, his heart, it's condemning him. And now it's trembling for the ark. And you see here, it's not trembling for his sons. And then there's this commotion. And this messenger from the tribe of Benjamin, who's escaped the slaughter, and he's torn his robes and he's thrown dirt on his heads, which are signs of deep mourning because he's grieving. And he just ran 20 miles here to Shiloh, and most of it being uphill. And this messenger, he doesn't run over to Eli, but he runs over to where the people are gathered. And they could see that it was bad news just by the way the man looked, with the torn robes and covered with dirt. But Eli, he's blind, and so he can't see the man. But he hears the noise of everyone's loud crying, and so he's trying to piece all of this together in his mind. So Eli says, "What does this mean?" As he's trying to figure all this out. And the messenger, he comes over to Eli, and he tells him that he's the messenger that just came back from battle. And then Eli asks him, he says, "What happened, my son?" And the messenger tells him that Israel fled, that there was a great slaughter. And then he tells Eli, "Also, your 2 sons are dead." And Eli, he's not surprised. He's been waiting for that news for about 18 years since the prophet came. So that doesn't surprise him. But then he heard something that he never imagined he would ever hear, that the ark was taken by the Philistines. And as soon as the man mentioned the ark being captured, Eli, he fell off his chair. It snapped his neck because he was too fat. And most people say it's probably from eating the meat from the sacrifices that his sons were stealing. But God never mentioned through the prophet to Eli that Eli himself would also be dying the same day as his sons. And I don't know if you see it this way, but I kind of think I see God being very merciful to Eli here, because Eli, he's not having to grieve over his sons for a lot of years after their deaths. And you have to see here that God, he has been very, very patient with Eli and his 2 evil sons, that he's put this off a long time to let them live up to the time of Eli's death. And so here, when I think about this, and I think about that prophet of God that was sent to Eli, I don't believe that was so much for Eli's sake, but that was for us to know that this prophecy was fulfilled, and that this now is going to bring in this new priesthood where Eli's line will be phased out. And then we find out at the end that this womanizing, cheating priest, Phinehas, who had been sleeping with the girls outside of the tabernacle, we find out that he has a wife who is much more godly than he was, and that she's with child. And it's very close to the last stages of her pregnancy. And so when she hears the news, she's shocked and she goes into labor. And she's suffering 3 losses here, which makes this just way too much for her to bear. And if the order written is the same order of importance to her, the greatest loss to her was the ark, and then it was the high priest, her father-in-law, and then it was her worthless husband. And so now, with the glory departed from Israel, she has no desire to live. But the women that are helping her to give birth, they're all trying to encourage her, for her to keep going and to have hope, to keep trying, that she's going to have another son, which is what every woman would have wanted. But she's so distraught by this news, where these 3 things that directly affect her life are gone. So she has no hope. She has no desire to live. And so she's not even answering the women that are helping her. But she has enough soundness of mind to name the child. And she gives him a terrible name. She names him Ichabod, which means the glory has departed. Ichabod. Ichabod Crane. I'm not really sure about the last name, but it fits. And I used to know this local rock band back in the 80s called Icky Crane. And I thought that was a really good name for a rock band. But this is a terrible name for a boy. And then Phinehas' wife, after she names this boy, she dies. And we read about this boy one more time in the scriptures, and that's in 1 Samuel 14:3. And all it tells us is that this Ichabod, that he had a brother whose name was Abijah, who became the high priest. And it says that he stayed in Nob. And so this is all during the time of King David when he was hiding from Saul. And the reason why all the priests are hiding in Nob or staying in Nob is because there's no more Shiloh. And we learn about that in Psalm 78. Because what we learned that after this battle, after the capture of the ark from the Philistines, that the Lord, he abandoned his tabernacle in Shiloh, and he allowed the enemy to destroy Shiloh. And that's also confirmed in Jeremiah 7 and also in Jeremiah chapter 26. And I read these stories. I think these stories are great. I think they're interesting. I think they're exciting. But I don't believe they're here just to entertain us. And there are a whole lot of truths that you could dig out of this passage about faith and about presumption, and they apply to us. But I think that the one principle that we really want to leave here with, and the truth that we need to see here, because I think this is probably the greatest example in all of the Bible, is that we never want to put our children's interests above God's interests. That we need to discipline our kids and we need to correct them. And even here, you notice, it's even when they're older. It's not just when they're little children. We need to correct our kids our whole life, because who else is going to love them and speak into their life? We're not to neglect our parenting, or else someday, the Lord, he will hold us accountable. So last week, we left Israel and the people of Shiloh as a defeated people, losing 30,000 people in battle to the Philistines with the capture of the Ark of God. And if you were of Israel at this time, you might have felt like God was done with you, where you would have no hope that things were ever going to get any better. And that's how we can feel in our lives after suffering great losses. And then looking at our world, as if things could ever change, where it seems like sometimes there's been too much that's been lost. And as we left chapter 4 last week, we heard of this baby being born who was the son of the high priest Eli. So it was to his son Phinehas. And as the baby's mother lay there dying, after giving birth to this son, she named her son Ichabod, because of the capture of the ark, and then because of the death of the high priest, and then of her husband Phinehas, where it was just too much for her to bear. So she also died. Where Ichabod means the glory has departed, and it seemed like that's all that could be left in this story, because everyone's dead. His mother's dead, his father's dead, his grandfather died, and then there's the 30,000 dead left in Ebenezer. And so now, with the ark gone, and very soon after this, Shiloh itself is destroyed, the truth is that the glory, it had departed from Israel a long time before the ark was ever captured. They just didn't know it. But the glory had departed when Israel had decided that they would no longer follow the Lord or obey his covenant. When everyone had decided to do just what seemed right in each of their own lives, where everyone would be their own master of their own domain, where no one, not even God, was going to tell them what to do anymore. You can just do as you please, where nobody cares about anything that God has to say. And that's what religion had become, where not many of the people of Israel were trusting in God anymore. Where even the priests at the tabernacle, they didn't believe in God. In fact, they were the worst of all the people. They were all hypocrites. where now most of the people who were coming to the tabernacle, they were only celebrating the feast days, and they were only doing this outwardly. They were not doing it from their hearts. They were all just nominal believers. They're kind of what we call our CEOs, our Christmas and Easter onlys, those Christians that only go to church on Christmas and Easter, where the rest of the year they don't go to church because they don't have a place for God. They really don't believe in God, or else they minimize him. Just a little bit of Jesus on top. Where outwardly, these people, they would say that they're Jews and they believe in God, but in their private lives and their hidden lives, they're just filling their own lusts and they're serving idols just like everyone else around them. And so now, how do you turn a society like that around? Well, you let them have the fill of their ways until it destroys them, until they give up, and until they look up. And if you look at their society and then you take a look at our society, I don't think it's too much of a stretch to imagine all this. And you may wonder, like I wonder, well, how bad will it have to get here in our current world until we look up again? Because I think to a lot of us who live here in America, it does look like the glory has departed. And like the ark here, which represents Jesus, our ark has been captured a long time ago, where that believing in Jesus, the real Jesus, isn't very popular in America. And for us who know the Lord in our personal lives, we have hope. But I don't see much hope for our country unless something changes, unless we as a nation turn again and look up. And that won't happen unless there's an intervention by God, a revival, like what's about to happen here during Israel's time of having no glory. And so this is a low point in Israel where they think God may finally be done with them. But we'll see that God is still in control and he still has great plans for Israel. He has plans and things that they never dreamed of. And now you have the Philistines here. And of course, the Philistines, they're all ecstatic in the fact that they beat Israel because they thought they were going to lose that battle badly. But for them, it was an amazing battle because God let them win. Because the only reason they won is that God, he had allowed the Philistines to beat his people. Because he's using the Philistines to teach his people a lesson and to teach Israel how to walk with him. Because sometimes you have to be brought very low in life to be able to change, or else you'll just keep walking in your foolishness. And so the Philistines, after they have this spectacular win, they're carrying around the Ark of the Covenant, which to them, it was just a trophy of war. And all it was a fairly small wooden box, all covered in solid gold. And it was about the size of a small coffee table or a hope chest.
You need to change your world. You need to let it go. Oh.
Thanks for listening to Change Your World. Change Your World is an outreach of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, and your neighborhood church. If you're listening to Change Your World in the Detroit metro area, why don't you join us for church this Sunday? Our service time is 10 a.m. at Calvary Chapel, Waterford, 183 South Winding Drive, Waterford, Michigan. We're competing with the Catholics. It's only an hour. All the donuts you can eat, and you don't have to believe a thing we say, but it could change your world.
You need to change your world.
The rest of today's message can be heard at yourneighborhoodchurch.org. So check us out and download the app. And until next week, remember,